Hi, welcome back to Humanistic Psychology here at the University of West Georgia. This video will be number 7 in a series devoted to Carl Rogers, and more specifically on his most famous book, which is On Becoming a Person. Today what we're going to do is take up material out of chapter 7 out of that book, which is entitled A Process Conception of Psychotherapy. And the main theme, the main thing that's going on in chapter 7 is he's presenting a continuum of psychological change. Okay, so this continuum is going to consist of 7 stages ultimately, although no one's completely in one of these stages or another one. But the reason why I wanted to end our treatment of Carl Rogers with this is it's a way of describing kind of the broad spectrum of what life is about and consequently what psychotherapy can be about. So a continuum consisting of 7 stages. Now, here's the way I'd like you to study this and know this, because I think it's the most efficient way. The important thing to know is where this continuum starts and where this continuum ends. So when I ask you questions about this on the test, I'm going to be asking you about that. Characteristics of where it starts, characteristics of where it ends. Now, I should also give you another warning right off that in your notes, I'm drawing a distinction between stage 6 of this continuum and stage 7 of this continuum. But when I ask you about it on the test, I'm not going to ask you to differentiate between stage 6 and stage 7. Why? Because those two stages are so much alike. I'm just including both of them because Rogers says that, well, stage 6 is particularly critical because that's when psychotherapeutic state changes begin to take in an enduring way. Okay, so when I ask you about that end of the continuum on the test, I'll ask you about what does stage 6/7 look like? Okay, so little caveat for the next test, I guess. So let's characterize this continuum in very general terms and then move more toward a more specific characterization. Okay, so his way of, this is a little bit awkward, but his way of initially describing the continuum is the beginning stages, like stage 1, are states of the greatest amount of fixity. Okay, now remember what I told you about that word, the way he uses it in this book. Fixity, right, or the word fixed really means stationary. Okay, so the kind of psychological states that are characterized by a mostly stationary, unchanging way of moving through life, as opposed to what he calls, and this is the awkward part, changingness. And to me, that's such a bizarre Frankenstein type word, like you take a gerund, I guess, and add another suffix onto it and you get changingness. Oh, changingness, Frankenstein running amok. But at any rate, that's a way of characterizing this continuum. Another way, same idea, just different words. From rigid structure on one hand, okay, unchanging, rigid structure, to flow, a kind of flowing way of being, a highly adaptable, a highly changing, deeply in process way of moving through life. And finally, another pair of vocabulary words that rides right in parallel with what we're already saying. This continuum proceeds from stasis, right, from being static, in other words, unchanging, to process. And there's that P word again that he loves so much. And remember what I told you about that a couple videos ago, that that's a code word for ongoing metamorphosis, transformation, change, and so on. All right, so that's a way of characterizing this continuum in very general terms. So let's get more into the more specific elements of it. So stage 1, where does it all start? Okay, greatest fixity, greatest rigidity, we've already said that. All right, so what about more specifically? So here's some of the characteristics he notes in chapter 7. In stage 1, the beginnings of this continuum, people tend not to be able to recognize problems or personal challenges in their lives. And the reason why is because insofar as life is problematic, and by the way, everyone's life is problematic in different ways, people in stage 1 will always pin the problems outside of themselves. Okay, so the problems are always external. The problem is always with whatever, the government, the neighborhood, the professor, the university, if you're a student possibly. It's always a matter, like if you're in this stage 1, it's like all the professors suck and that's why you have so many problems. But that's, of course, a way of not owning your participation in that. By the way, general sort of sidebar insight, like if you discover that the same kind of problem is cropping up again and again in your life in different contexts, probably the reason for it has something to do with you. Okay, so it's probably not just bad luck that, well, the same thing happened to me 15 times in a row. Yeah, it's probably something you're doing at that point. You know, it's not just random chance. Everyone's life has some nasty moments due to random chance. But if the same problem keeps cropping up again and again and again, it's probably you. Okay, so stage one. Okay, end of sidebar moment. So no problems or personal challenges. Recognize why, because problems are seen as external to the person. All right. Consequently, people in stage one have very little desire to change. All right, well, why should you have a desire to change if you see all the problems in your life as external to yourself? All right, why should you change? There's no motivation to change. It's the world that needs to change to suit me. Yeah, good luck with that. Here's another little bit of wisdom that maybe you're absorbing in college. You know, here's the reality. The world will continue to be the world whether you like it or not. All right? The world is not going to change to cater to your interests. All right? Like the only empowerment you have is you don't have the power to change the world. What you have the power to do is change your life with respect to the world. So if you want to be empowered, just a little helping hint there. So these people have no desire to change. He gives a little quote, I think I'm practically healthy. In other words, the problem's not with me. The problem's out there in the world somehow. Hence, these people are not likely to come voluntarily to therapy. Well, why should they? If you sort of connect the dots for a second, it all kind of makes sense. Well, if all the problems in your life you see as external to yourself and consequently you have no desire to change, well, why would you ever go to therapy unless you're court ordered? Okay, so that's okay, maybe I should take a second to describe this. You know, there's sort of two big regions of reasons why people go to therapy. One is because they themselves want to change their life, because their lives hurt, they aren't working, they realize that at some level, so they go to therapy. The other big reason is because other people have problems with the person, not necessarily the person, him or herself, but other people around. Now, usually, the way people get to therapy this way is by court order. Okay, the court will order people to go to therapy, and that's a tough row to hoe, you know, because like if you're in this stage one attitude and you think that, well, you know, the problem is with the legal system or something like that. I don't have a problem. It's just that I keep having to go to jail all the time, you know, or I'm constantly embroiled in legal problems all the damn time. And the legal system has coerced me into going to therapy. Well, the odds of your changing are extremely remote, all right, if that's your sort of posture and attitude. And the reason why you can kind of get a sense for it out of this, it's like, yeah, you have no reason to change. You may have a reason to act like you're changing, but that's different from really changing, okay? All right, so end of second sidebar moment, I guess. So these people are not likely to come voluntarily to therapy. Involuntarily, yeah, but not voluntarily. So feelings and personal meanings tend to be neither recognized nor owned by these people. Well, the thing about that is, if you recognize personal meanings and feelings, probably you're opening yourself up to having to change somehow, right? So if you realize, if you have enough insight into yourself that you can sort of own your feelings and own your personal meanings, well, you probably have enough insight into yourself to recognize that sometimes you got to change. We all do, okay? Sometimes we have to grow. We all do, even if you're old like myself. I have to grow sometimes too, right? You know, I have to transform my life sometimes too and question what I'm invested in and so on and so forth. So, but people who are in the stage one, whose primary project is not to change, aren't likely to recognize those sorts of feelings and personal meanings, because it starts to open up the possibility that, well, hey, you know, sometimes you might need to change. So close relationships are perceived as dangerous by these people. And once again, the idea here is that the thing about close relationships is if you're pretty open with another person, well, you're probably open also to being changed by the other person. And if your fundamental project is not to be changed, why should you ever come into a real close, intimate relationship with someone? Because if you do, well, that might change you. But if your fundamental project is not to change, you're going to be perceiving those kinds of relationships as dangerous in the first place. All right? So these people are not the kind to fall in any sort of deep way in love or have deep friendships with other people or anything like that. And why should they? Because it's against their fundamental project. All right? So they tend to interpret their experience mostly in terms of the past. Okay, in other words, okay, some examples. Maybe that sounds a little bit abstract. Like, well, you know, I am how I am because that's how they taught me to be. That's how I grew up. That's how God made me. You see how like all of those kind of foreclose the possibility of changing in the present? It's like, well, you know, if you attribute all of what you are to stuff in the past, well, guess what? Unless you have access to a time machine, you're SOL. All right? So you can't just go and change the past. So like that's a handy find for people whose primary project is not to change. It's like, yeah, like pin everything about what you are and who you are and how you move through life onto stuff in the past. Because then, well, you can't just go and change the past. So already you have sort of a paradigm for not changing. You know, it's like, well, that's what they taught me in school. Ugh. You know. So interpreting experience mostly in terms of the past rather than the unique present. Once you start opening yourself up to the unique present more, well, sometimes the thing about the unique present is it's actually asking you to change sometimes. Okay. And finally, Rogers regards this as a constriction of the greater richness of experience. So these early stages of the continuum, or stage one of the continuum, he sees as a constriction of your deeper possibilities as a human being, because your deeper possibilities, from his point of view, have to do with exceeding your outer boundaries, becoming greater than what you are, right? Like growing as a human being. Once again, irrespective of your age, right? Taking up the adventure of human existence in a deeper way, a more significant and meaningful way as you move down the road of life. Like that's our real human birthright. And insofar as we tend not to do that, he sees that as kind of a constriction, you know, a kind of debilitation. All right, so that's, I guess, kind of a relatively fast way of characterizing the beginnings of this continuum. But the main theme, what's the main theme, once again, is not changing, fixity, stasis. Okay, and I think the easy way to sort of make sense of this for a test, let's say, just a hypothetical example, is to sort of remember that main theme, because a lot of these attributes are just going to fall out logically from that. It's like, yeah, if your project is not to change, like why would you ever have a deep relationship? Because a deep relationship might change you, okay? So, all right, just a little helpful studying hint. So let's move to the other end of the continuum. Like I said in the beginning of the video, I broke these out in terms of stage 6 and 7 in your notes. But the thing is, I'm only going to be asking you about stage 6/7 because the descriptors are a lot alike. I just broke them out in your notes as two different things because Rogers, like I said earlier, says that in stage 6, there's kind of a priority there because that's where the changes tend to become permanent. But that's the only reason. Okay, for doing that. By the way, you know, the other stages, you may be asking, well, what about stage 2 and stage 3 and stage 4? You know, like they're logical interpolations. If you understand where this thing begins and where it ends, the intermediate stages are logical interpolations between those two. Okay, so that's the rationale for that. Okay, so stage 6. And hopefully, as we get into these descriptors, they're going to sound like the opposite of stage 1. In fact, that's an easy way of studying. It's like, just realize that the other end of the continuum is pretty much the opposite of where it started. Okay, so, but let's go through them. Full immediate flow of feelings and experience. Well, you know, we just got done saying that in stage 1, you know, feelings aren't owned. There's not a full immediate flow of experience and so on. So at the other end of the continuum, we find the exact opposite of that. So full immediate flow of feelings and experience, especially those that have been previously stuck, denied, repressed, and so on. You know? Okay, so a full flowing, like one way of thinking about this is that you're laying claim to a greater range of who and what you actually are. right? You're not living out like a little sort of narrow, cookie cuttered out kind of little range of what you are. You're living within the broader range of your capabilities and the reality of your person. Okay, so let's, I guess, repeat it, because once again, repetition important to memories. Full, immediate flow of experience and feelings, especially those who have been stuck. Acceptance of that rather than fighting against it. Okay, so what you might infer from this is there's much less repression, much less denial, and all of that in the later stages of this continuum. So acceptance. Now, this next one may sound a little bit odd, so I may have to sort of unfold it a little bit to you. To be one's feelings rather than to have feelings. Okay, so this is a way of sort of almost a poetic way of characterizing the second end of the continuum. So in normal English, we say, I have feelings, or I have thoughts, or I have an experience, or something like that. Well, in the later stages of this continuum, you're no longer treating your feelings like something you have, like they were an object, like you would have any other object, like you would have a phone or whatever, cell phone, or you would have glasses case, or whatever. Like, you're not treating your feelings and your thoughts and elements of your subjectivity that way. It's more like you are your feelings. You are your thinking. You are experience. It's not something you have as though you were distant from it. You are it. Thou art that, like it says in the Upanishads. Okay, so to be one's feelings, to be one's experience. So the distance between you and your experience breaks down. Okay, and this may sound like an odd thing, because it doesn't really comport very well with how we use regular English. All right, because we hardly ever say, well, I am my feelings. That's almost like a poetic, you'd read that in a poem maybe, but not in regular English. So you no longer have a self either, in much the same way. Like, your self is no longer an object that you possess in some way. Rather, it's something that you are. You become a pouring forth. You become a flowing, rather than, well, at some level I have, like you possess in some sense, a self. It's like, no, your self is an ongoing pouring forth into the present. It's a real different way of seeing yourself. So the self as an object of reflection, the object-like sense of ourselves, tends to disappear. The self at this moment is this feeling. The self is this moment. You getting it? And I realize that, the way I'm saying this is a little bit counterintuitive with respect to regular English, but we're talking about the other end of the continuum of life, right? Of course, it's not going to be necessarily obvious what this is, so suppose that ultimately underneath everything you think you are and have to be, that really what you are is an infinite pouring forth into the eternal now. Suppose that's what's really going on, and the rest of it is just sort of window dressing. Well, as you live toward the other horizon of life, maybe some of those more illusory senses will drop away, and you'll start to live exactly as though you were an infinite pouring forth into the ocean of life. Just a thought. Maybe your education is ultimately about that. There's another thought, somewhat subversive. All right, so the self in this moment is this feeling. Immersion in the moment of experience. Ooh, couldn't have predicted that one. That's sarcasm, by the way. So not just reflective perception. The self is subjectively in the existential moment. Okay? You are the existential moment. You are the existential moment. You are an infinite pouring forth into the boundless, roiling sea of life itself. Consider this as a possibility, okay? That you are actually a participant in the universal dynamics of transcendence that occur across the entire cosmos, okay? Consider the possibility that that is a more apt description of who and what you actually are than that you were, whatever, Susie Jones, born in Carrollton, Georgia, blah, blah, blah. All right. Okay, so experiencing at this stage takes on a real process quality? Well, once again, since you've been hearing this word process for, what, 7 videos now, that's probably fairly obvious, but the next one isn't necessarily. Also with a physiological loosening, greater physical expressiveness and emotionality. Okay, physiological loosening means that the way your body moves. It's talking about how you inhabit your body, right? Physiology has to do with the body. So physiological loosening means how you live in your body. And what he's saying is at the other end of this continuum, there's a lot less sort of bodily rigidity and a lot more flexible and adaptive. Even the way you inhabit your body, it gets pretty primitive that way. So, I love this next little bit. All right. Sometimes I can't even believe that they pay me to do this job. You ever sort of wonder about that? Like, my goodness, like they pay me to say all these cool things to young people. And then I get a paycheck. Oh, must not be a completely malevolent universe after all. Another subversive thought. Okay, so on page 148, 149. So at this point, stage 6, all right, other end of the continuum, client feels cut loose from his previously stabilized framework. In other words, all the kind of systems that sort of made you think you were in control of things and kept things sort of stabilized and kind of rigidly predictable, like that's all sort of dissolving away. So you feel cut loose from your previous world. Like your world has destabilized and you along with it. And instead you're becoming something unimaginable, something perhaps unimaginably beautiful, you know? Like, what's the point of your life? Interesting question. What's the point of your life? What's your point? What's the real point of your time here? You know, once you get past all the cheap, easy answers, what are you really doing here? What are you up to? Here's a cheap, easy answer. Well, I'm getting a job so I get lots of money. Yeah, everyone wants a job and everyone wants lots of money. That's not being debated. What else is going on? Okay? You know, maybe cutting yourself loose from all the chains that bind you and that tether you and keep you held down and smaller than you really need to be. Maybe the whole point of your educational process, just a thought, is to learn to spread the wings of your soul and catch the wind of reality itself. Just a thought. Okay, so he feels cut loose from his previous world, a sensation which is both wondrous and frightening at the same time. Yeah, it's scary. You know, but I guess the big question is what you get worth the price? You know, like if you're really struck to the pith and marrow by the wondrousness of things and the fluidity of things and, you know, the beauty of universal transcendence, then maybe moving this way is worthwhile. But if your thing is like, well, you're kind of too scared or paralyzed for that, well, maybe you need to work through some stages to get there. So there are no longer problems as such, external or internal. Once again, you do not have problems. You are the problem. You know, once again, that can be scary. Oh, I am the problem. I am the problem. But here's the upside to it. If you're the problem, you've got a lot of power to change things all of a sudden. You don't have to wait around for the world to change things for you. It's like if you are the problem, then you can exert your talents and your motivations to change your life. You're more empowered than you were before when you recognize that you are the locus of the problem. So you no longer have a problem anymore. You are the problem. The problem is not an object. Okay, hopefully I've repeated this about 6 times. Hopefully you're getting it. Okay, so I'm trying to keep moving because I think this video, it could end up being too long otherwise. So stage 7, and hopefully this is going to sound a lot like stage 6. So a growing and continuing sense of acceptant ownership of changing feelings, along with a basic trust in your own process. That you can trust. Here's another thing for you to think about. Like, maybe you can trust what you are. Okay? Not just in a trivialized sense, but in a really deep sense. Maybe you can trust life. Maybe you can trust the universe. Okay? Maybe you're underneath it all, even if you have, well, you don't have, even if you are a problem in certain ways, that you can trust your basic process to carry you beyond the problems that you are. So the situation is experienced and interpreted in its newness, not its past. Okay, so What is this about? Okay, so this is about being in contrast to stage one. Stage one, remember, one of the attributes of that is people tend to interpret their way of being in terms of the past. Why? Because that's not something you can change. So it bolsters the project of not changing. So in the other end of the continuum, it's mostly about the present, responding to the spontaneous and creatively unfolding present moment as fluidly and as adaptively as possible. Okay, so the situation is experienced in terms of its newness. The self is much less frequently a perceived object and much more frequently something felt and processed. Boy, I think you probably get that already when I was going on in sort of a possibly irresponsibly poetic way about, well, maybe what you are ultimately is a pouring forth into infinite space and infinite time. That maybe that's what you are ultimately, like a nameless wanderer on the trackless expanses of life itself, you know, beyond category, beyond name, beyond project, you know, different way to live. All right, so, but hey, you know, try it out for yourself. Okay, don't take my word for it. Don't take Carl Rogers' word for it either. Try it out for yourself. See if it works for you. So personal constructs. Ooh, what's a personal construct? Are tentatively reformulated to be validated against further experience, but even then to be held loosely. So personal constructs are sort of the basic ideas you have about who you are, what you think your life's about, what reality is about, and so on. So basic, fundamental sort of concepts or ideas about all that kind of stuff. So learning to hold on to your personal constructs loosely rather than clinging to them with a white-knuckle death grip. It's like, well, I got to think of reality this way because that's the way it is. You know, it's like, well, you know, maybe you're more adaptable than that underneath it all. Okay, hold on loosely. Don't let it go. You cling too tightly, you're going to lose control. Those are words from an old dinosaur band from the 1970s, a band called 38 Special. But let me slow down so you can catch them again. Hold on loosely, their song goes. Hold on loosely. Don't let it go. You cling too tightly, you're going to lose control. See, that's the paradox of clinging too tightly, right? You know, we think that we're in control of things when we cling really tightly to them, but the thing is, your control project can itself be out of control. In fact, that happens very easily. All right, so, and finally, effective choice of new ways of being. Effective choice of new ways of being. Once again, deceptively simple. What is life about? Effectively choosing, re-choosing, creating, discovering new ways of being for yourself. And why shouldn't it? Why shouldn't you be living an adventure at the level of your being, actually, when you think about it? When you get past all the damn social conventions that make life seem like a small and pitiful thing, like, why shouldn't you be living an adventure at the level of being, and that adventure would involve transcending even your present mode of being? Entering into unexpected new vistas. Why not? What the hell, you know? Like, you got all dressed up to show up to the world today. You know, you got your wig on straight and everything. Where's my hat? I forgot my hat of the day. You got your hat of the day on, hopefully, or maybe you didn't. Anyhow, so if you're all dressed up, why not treat life as an adventure? You're here. What the hell, man? You could do worse. You could do worse. You could just be like an obedient robot. Okay, so let's read this summary on page 154. When the individual has, in his process of change, reached the 7th stage, we find ourselves involved in a new dimension. The client has now incorporated the quality of motion, of flow, of changingness into every aspect of his psychological life, and this becomes its outstanding characteristic. He lives in his feelings knowingly and with basic trust in them and acceptance of them. The ways in which he construes experience are continually changing as his personal constructs are modified by each new living event. His experiencing is process in nature, feeling the new in each situation and interpreting it anew. Interpreting in terms of the past only to the extent that the now is identical with the past. He experiences with a quality of immediacy, knowing at the same time that he experiences. He values exactness in differentiation of his feelings and of the personal meanings of his experience. His internal communication between various aspects of himself is free and unblocked. He communicates himself freely in relationships with others. And those relationships are not stereotyped, but person to person. He is aware of himself, but not as an object. Rather, it is a reflexive awareness, a subjective living in himself in motion. He perceives himself as responsibly related to his problems. Indeed, he feels a fully responsible relationship to his life in all of its fluid aspects. He lives fully in himself as a constantly changing flow of process. Mic drop. Okay, so let me click back to the other notes. We've got a little bit, I think we can do the last little bit of this, keep it on this video. All right, so some additional notes about this continuum. All right, so let me get my other glasses on. First, relatively few clients make it to stage 7. I'm laughing because that's probably obvious to you already. It's like, how many people do you know that are really living as though they were an infinite pouring forth into the ocean of life, you know? Probably not that many, okay. So it embodies the value of fluidity, okay? Not everyone agrees that this is the good in life. You might not agree that this is the good in life, okay? And if you don't agree, then that's fine, you know, but probably you might think of, you know, if you're going to become a psychotherapist, not becoming a psychotherapist of this persuasion, because if you really think that there's not much to fluidity, then, well, this kind of psychotherapy is just going to irritate you, and life's too short for you to be irritated most of your life, okay? So, value of fluidity. According to this thing, change happens slowly. Well, I think that that's fairly obvious because we're talking about holistic change. We're talking about, and we have been throughout these videos, about changing at the level of the entire gestalt of one's way of being, all right? So that's not like flipping a light switch on. That tends to take time, okay? It takes time. So contrary to how therapy is being shaped economically, here's the thing about sort of the economic reality of the clinical situation. Like insurance companies, who end up most of the time being the parties that pay for things, tend to want to pay for things that happen quickly, or at least that seem to happen quickly. So there's a little bit of a tension between schools of psychotherapy like this, or psychoanalysis for that matter falls into this too, like that are seeking this kind of deep systemic type of change in someone's life, you know, which obviously happens pretty slowly for most of us, for the vast majority of people, and the insurance companies who want things to happen fast, because the faster they happen, the less money they have to pay out is what it boils down to. So that's why, you know, in American psychology, or psychiatry probably more accurately, like drug treatments are such a big deal because they're low cost, is what it boils down to. Now, what does all of this require? Let's put a cap on this video, okay? All of this requires acquiring a taste for becoming and growing as a person, changing your life, changing your way of being. And for the reason why I picked that way of wording it is, you know, acquired taste. Maybe you've heard this turn of phrase before. An acquired taste is something that probably you're not going to like at first, and you got to sort of hang with it for a while before you begin to like it. Like anchovies or something like that, you know, or martinis maybe, you know, assuming you're 21, of course. You know, some things are acquired tastes. Like most people do not like anchovies when they first taste an anchovy. Most people do not like, you know, they have a sip of martini and so, well, thanks for that wonderful drink of turpentine. That was just great. Well, you have to acquire a taste for them over time. Well, you know, maybe entering into the deeper possibilities of life works that way. You know, at first you're probably not going to like it. Why? Because it's too weird and scary, and, you know, you have to sort of, you know, it's like you're on a ride at Six Flags or wherever, you know. It takes a little while for you to be all right with letting go of the bar, right? Like a roller coaster or something like that, because a lot of us move through our lives by clinging onto the bar and just waiting for it to be over. Well, you know, maybe a deeper paradigm is to, you know, trust in your process, trust in life a little bit more, be willing to do things that you think are perhaps impossible for yourself, and in the process, expand the outer perimeter of your being. Eventually, you can let go of the bar, and in the process, enjoy your life a hell of a lot more than you otherwise would. Just a thought. That's an acquired taste too, right? So, you know, living toward the edge of what you can be is an acquired taste. Like living life for an adventure is an acquired taste. You're probably not going to like it at first, but if you hang with it long enough, your life might be improved. All right, just a thought. So a taste for process, for change, for contact with the beyond, for living life as an adventure at the level of who and what you are. And yeah, if, you know, as you're hearing this, it's sort of like, well, this is sort of freaking me out. This lecture is like freaking me out slightly. Well, hang with it. Hang with it. This is the best thing I can say. If you can not be, whatever, paralyzed, debilitated, freaked out, but you can hang with it long enough to acquire the taste for the deeper reaches of life, that might be toward the good, ultimately. So not to be too freaked out by change, by transience, but to find the courage to revel in your time. Revel in your time. I'm stealing a line from the movie Blade Runner, OMG, but I'm giving him credit. Maybe part of the challenge of your human existence, your time in this world, is to learn to revel in your time. Okay? Your time to be alive as a human being. And in reveling in your time, to ride the cresting wave of your life as far as you possibly can. You know, life is not asking you to be paralyzed and scared by stuff. Right? It's asking you to step beyond what scares you. Just a thought. For most people, that's an acquired taste. To move past your fears, that's an acquired taste. Probably not going to want to do it at first. That's okay. Just keep trying. Just keep trying. Who knows what you'll become if you take this up? Who knows what you will become? Maybe something wonderful, something beautiful. And if this little lecture series and these videos can be part of that, well, hell yeah. Yeah, buddy. I'm all about that. In any case, this ends our treatment of Carl Rogers, so video number 7. In the next video, we'll take up a different thinker. In any case, I hope you have a great, wonderful day. Yes, have a good one. Take care. You rock.